Hello there, I'm Archie. I'm back for the ADHD Care podcast. I've got another special guest joining me virtually today. I've got Dr. Joel Steer, who is a consultant clinical psychologist who has worked in the NHS for many, many years, specialising in the neurodevelopmental field, particularly with a focus on kind of ADHD and autism. So we'll be discussing about mental health and ADHD in children, and also talking about disclosing and talking about your child's diagnosis with them. So this is following subsequent to them receiving the diagnosis of ADHD. And this is the conversation that sometimes we usually get asked by some of our parents, wanting to find out, how do we go about talking to your child, using the right words to them to inform them about their diagnosis and getting their understanding in terms of what that means to them, and then obviously discussing about how that might then apply to them in the future. Yeah, so that's where our conversation is going to go. So once again, just to reintroduce Dr. Steer, so Dr. Joel Steer works for Achieving for Children, which is based in Surrey in Kingston. So I think she's just trying to join in one more time. Let's have a look. How are you doing? You okay?
Yeah, all right. Just really very busy. Crazy busy. Yeah.
All right. So where do we start? In terms of an update, where about are you still working for Achieving for Children?
Yeah, still working for Achieving for Children. So I've been there. Hello?
Yeah, I'm still here. Sorry.
Hello?
I need to keep moving maybe so you can see I'm still here. Yeah, I am still here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yes, so I'm still working at Achieving for Children. I'm the associate director there now for the emotional health service. So that's kind of, we provide some of children's mental health services.
Great.
In Kingston and Richmond.
Amazing. You've moved up in the world, haven't you, since Croydon?
A little bit. But it is 20 years.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah. Look at me now, actually, saying that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I think you saw me literally like the early days of after I left the wards and I moved to community, and I was like first coming into this kind of ADHD specific world, neurodiversity world. And yeah, you took me under your wing and you were supervising me, and I was watching you running workshops and all the things that we used to do in Croydon back then. And yeah. So I thought today we can discuss about, there's two things I wanted to discuss about: mental health and ADHD, or mental health and neurodiversity, basically, and also the talking about ADHD with your child. So once they've had the assessment, the kind of diagnostic stage, and you, as a parent or carer, how to go about having that conversation with your young person.
I can give it a whirl.
And also find out from you, because you've published so many books as well. One obviously, which we all know, which is about the transition from primary to secondary school. You have another publication that you just released, haven't you, this year?
Yeah, the new one, which is perfect for this conversation, because it's like a children's book about ADHD. So it's for like primary school age children to read and understand and learn about their ADHD. Right. So I'll probably weave that into our conversation somehow.
Absolutely, yeah. If you want to do your marketing, if you want to tell us where people can purchase it and all of that, feel free to do that.
Oh well, it's all the usual places that you can get books, but I hate to say Amazon, because it's like they don't need any more publicity.
Have you done a book signing for that latest publication yet?
I haven't for the latest one. Partly because Claire, who I wrote it with, who's a nurse, she went on maternity leave just as we published it. So we've kind of not done any big. I've done a few podcasts and webinar-y things, but no big book signings.
Right. Yeah. Maybe, you never know. Something you might want to think about, maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
So, okay.
But yes.
All right. So, let's start with the whole sort of mental health and neurodiversity, really. Do you want us to focus on just ADHD, or do we include things like autism within that as well? Just in the conversation, what would you prefer?
I'm happy to do both. Yeah.
You happy to do both?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Depends what you're going to ask me, really.
Okay. Well, the podcast is called ADHD Care Podcast, so we can obviously focus in. And obviously, like when you think about mental health and ADHD, some of these things you can't see them just as a silo thing like ADHD. It's an umbrella term, as you know. So, in chances are, some of these young people that have ADHD might also have autism and learning difficulties and dyslexia and dyspraxia and all of that. So, yeah, we can discuss it from that sort of angle. From your experience, obviously working as a clinical psychologist, and you conduct.
That's fine.
So you conduct obviously ADHD assessments all the time, and within your assessments, you also look into assessing for kind of underlying mental health issues within that, don't you?
Absolutely, it's really important that we look at the mental health alongside ADHD, partly because we know it's such a common situation that someone has additional mental health difficulties alongside their ADHD, but also because it's really important that when we're doing these assessments, we're understanding what is contributing to the symptoms. And sometimes it might be the ADHD, sometimes it might be a mental health difficulty such as anxiety, or often it's both, but it's really important to try and untangle that when we're doing our assessments.
Absolutely, and certainly, because obviously I want the listeners to hear it from you. I conduct such assessments exactly how you just outlined it there. So, if it's a parent or anyone listening and they have their young person who, they're suspecting they might have ADHD in this case, and at the same time they are also presenting with other difficulties such as anxiety, mood issues, and things. From a clinical perspective, how do you go about conducting the assessment? How do you go about teasing out what is ADHD, which is not being explained by the anxiety or the mood issues, or how do you kind of separate the two?
Yeah, well, I think it is challenging to separate them because they're so often intertwined, but it is really important that we maybe use questionnaires to get a sense of the anxiety or mood difficulties from the young person's point of view, but also from the parent's point of view. And then we unpick that, talk about it in a lot more detail as we're talking about the ADHD symptoms. So if someone's reporting that they've got concentration difficulties, which is very typical with ADHD, that we might be trying to understand, well, when does that happen? Getting examples from a parent or from a young person, but also how long has it been going on for? So that can be a really key, helpful way to unpick around mental health and ADHD symptoms, because often we find that the symptoms of ADHD track back quite a long way in some form or another, but perhaps the mental health difficulties might have come a bit later, and possibly as a result of having undiagnosed ADHD or other neurodiversity like autism.
That point that you just said right at the end there, that's what I tend to see as well, that you find that if someone is struggling with their ADHD, like struggling with concentration, keep on top of things, they may be falling behind academically, socially, they're having issues there as well. That in itself can lead to them maybe exhibiting some issues around mental health, to some extent, anxiety or mood issues and things. So it's also very crucial to understand, where the link between the two. And certainly I work with adults as well, and that's what I tend to see, that they will come in having gone down the kind of mental health route. They've been assessed, diagnosed with things like anxiety, depression, they've been offered treatment for that, but at the same time haven't been assessed or diagnosed with ADHD, and it's then they come across ADHD sometimes by chance, or they feel that yes, they've had CBT or medication for their mood and anxiety, but it's not really kind of addressing the core issues, which obviously in this case is the undiagnosed ADHD. So yeah, it can be quite tricky, can't it?
It definitely can be. And I think, if we think about the experience of someone who doesn't have an identified ADHD, but probably every day they experience quite a lot of negative interactions or negative messages about themselves, that maybe they're lazy, they're stupid, they're rubbish, what a disaster. And there's no wonder that impacts on how they feel about themselves, their self-esteem, but also leads them to potentially be quite anxious and worry about things, whether that's going to school. We see quite often, more and more, we're seeing young people really struggling to attend school who have neurodiversity that's perhaps not been identified because they just don't feel understood and supported. And really, that unidentified ADHD has meant that they've developed additional mental health difficulties. So that's one of the absolute positives of trying to identify early in young people, as early as we can, when they do have ADHD. So hopefully we can put support and understanding in place so that they don't go on to develop some of these additional mental health presentations that we see.
Going back to that point that you're talking about, the early intervention and things, are you able to tell us some of the work that you do yourself in terms of, do you work with schools, do you work with primary care professionals such as GPs or other sort of health professionals within that category, not even just health, but social care as well, in terms of trying to get them to understand about, things like what we're discussing with ADHD, and how that can then, cause someone to have issues around the mental health if that's not really been picked up quite soon. So do you do a lot of kind of health promotion around neurodiversity with those sort of professionals?
Certainly, always keen to offer that training and information sessions to schools, GPs. I did a big piece of work for NHS Scotland earlier in the year where we delivered some, really basic information about what ADHD is, what it looks like, particularly ADHD in girls and women, as that's been a particular focus for them in terms of development. And that went out to every aspect of the health sector. So whether that was GPs, health visitors, school nurses, but also the child mental health teams, and then alongside that, thinking about schools and the education departments that we work in. And something I'm also really passionate about is trying to get some of these messages into the physical health sector, because actually so often there are contacts for these children and families with physical health, but perhaps not mental health or emotional wellbeing services. And so that sometimes might be a route in. So I was just learning the other day about how actually ADHD can be more common in people with type 1 diabetes, which I didn't know. And then I was thinking, I wonder how much actually children's diabetes clinics know about ADHD. So it kind of led me to start to think about that a bit more, and how important it is that actually these other sectors where actually particularly where there is vulnerability around ADHD are aware of how to make those referrals, what to look out for, and what support to offer to these families, really.
I'm just thinking, like, if a parent or carer takes a young person to the GP, for example, and they're presenting with things like anxiety or struggling academically, socially, and things. So I suppose what we're trying, because I've been doing some work with adults mainly in terms of GPs, for example, trying to be able to be more mindful of things like ADHD. Yes, we're not saying you screen anyone that comes through the door for ADHD, but to be mindful of it, sometimes it's just a case of using a rating scale, because obviously it's easier to go, okay, let me screen for anxiety, let me screen for the obvious kind of conditions that people they go to, but you find that ADHD is not usually something that would be thought about, particularly if someone is presenting with certain traits. And what I find is the presentation of ADHD and their awareness of ADHD is still lacking to some extent. They might view ADHD as the typical running around, can't sit still, the obvious kind of boisterousy type traits that people would associate ADHD with, but not the kind of emotional dysregulation and the executive functioning issues and the all of the other stuff that might not appear as obvious or linked with ADHD. So it's about them understanding as well how ADHD presents, and the different traits, categories that it presents, rather than just the typical impulsivity, hyperactivity, and inattention.
Yeah, so important. And I certainly see adults, and I've heard of adults who've been to their GP and have been told, you haven't got ADHD, you've got a degree, you can't have ADHD. So really trying to help GPs understand that really things have moved on quite significantly since then, and improve their knowledge. And as you say, often GPs are brilliant at screening for depression and anxiety, but trying to get this on their radar a bit more, and thinking about, well, could it be an undiagnosed ADHD? Because we know there are so many adults coming forward who feel that they really do connect with all these symptoms and they probably have got undiagnosed ADHD, and many of them are not having positive experiences with national health services, really. So, which is, meaning that lots of people are accessing their support and diagnoses through the private sector.
Yeah. And you got the, I think you touched a good point there about waiting lists, even though the ones that are actually going forward and seeking help and things that are having to wait. And this is across the country, really. In other countries, you hear this about the waiting times and we talk about early intervention, but at the same time, it's a bit of one of those situations where, yes, they are reaching out, but they are being told that we can't see you. Some of them are having to wait for 3 years, 5 years. And how someone's mental health can be affected during that duration. And certainly for a young person who is about to go through their crucial milestones, they've got the exams and GCSEs, or, transition to secondary school where they actually need that intervention. And some schools might not really implement or put things in place unless the young person has a diagnosis, which can be quite tricky as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Those waits are so long. It's terrible, and it is really difficult for young people, and feel for them and their parents, definitely.
Just in terms of like fast forward, like let's say someone's got the diagnosis of ADHD and they are also presenting with, how do you ensure that they are having like an overall support in terms of just not just addressing their ADHD, also looking into supporting them with their whatever mental health issues that they're presenting with? How do you factor into your treatment plan or care plan once they've had the diagnosis of ADHD?
I think it is really important that the care plan tackles the ADHD, but also the mental health is given due thought and consideration. So whether that's through therapeutic support, through medication, through a combination of both. But I also know that actually often once an ADHD diagnosis has been given, it can, so many people tell me they feel immediately very relieved and understood. And so in some ways that can actually sometimes support the mental health side of things indirectly, in that they feel better about themselves, perhaps less critical, more compassionate towards themselves. Really important to include all of that.
And with some of the work that you do directly with the young person, do you run groups? Do you do one-to-ones? And if you just maybe elaborate and tell us a bit more about your kind of work that you do directly with young people.
So it is really important to work directly with young people around their ADHD so that they can understand what it is, what does that mean, how does it affect them as an individual. And I do lots of conversations about, it's really important to understand that once you've met one person with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD, and that everyone's different because there are so many symptoms and different combinations of symptoms. So not to make assumptions that just because your friend also has ADHD that you're the same as them, or you need the same care package and support, because absolutely it's not always like that. So helping that individual child or young person understand their ADHD and what that looks like is important. So looking through the symptoms together, thinking about, okay, yes, this is me, that I am really fidgety, or how am I fidgety? But then also, what does that mean? What's fidgeting about? So helping them understand that actually fidgeting is a good thing, even though you might get in trouble for fidgeting. It's actually your body trying to help you concentrate. So really helping a child understand what's going on behind the symptoms, and understand that, lots of the things that we see with ADHD, it's not about them choosing any of this. This is about the way that their brain works, and it works a bit differently from one of their friends, perhaps who doesn't have neurodiversity, and that's okay. But and I think that's my dog.
That's right.
I'm literally just going to open the door because otherwise he's just get him into the other room. Oh, brilliant.
The
joys of working at home.
Could have been your kids.
Exactly. Yeah, it could have been. At least they're at school.
Yeah, go on.
What I was going to say was, it's really important that children understand the strengths and the challenges of their own ADHD, because it's so often it can get caught up in all the negatives, the problems, the difficulties, but really trying to help them think, okay, what advantage does ADHD give you, as well as the difficulties that it might cause you on a daily basis. So is it that you're really quick thinking and that allows you to be a bit extra funny that we see, or really good in an emergency situation, or all sorts of different things. And my new book, which is My Unique ADHD World, helps children explore that. So it's a children's book aimed at helping them see the strengths as well as the challenges of their ADHD, so that they can get that kind of balance in understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. If we think about, going back to my point about how services are set up, particularly in the NHS, you may remember when we worked together, donkeys years ago, how the setup was at that time in the NHS, where we had literally like an in-house support for neurodiversity young people. We had, psychologists, nurses, occupational therapists, dietitians, psychiatrists, pediatricians. We used to link with pediatricians, didn't we?
Yeah.
Imagine that setup that we had then, where which is amazing. Now you don't. I tell people about that, and they look at me like, "Wow, you would like it to have a setup like that." But
it was all singing and all dancing, wasn't it?
Yeah, we used to have joint team meetings, and like referrals would just flow from one profession to the other. But it's just the whole multi-agency work that I really, really valued at that time. But post-diagnosis support. Do you remember the groups that we used to run as well? We had the transition workshops. Do you remember moving from primary to secondary school? I still have the resources for that, actually. I'm trying to imitate and set up something similar in our clinic. The children's groups that we used to run specifically for young people, understanding like what you were saying about, because some of them might feel or think that no one else has ADHD, or they might not know a lot of people that have it, so bringing them together was really quite useful and quite good for them to, it's part of understanding who they are and relating to other people that are going through the same, to some extent, experiences as them. The workshops, the parenting workshops that we have, I think as far as parenting workshops is concerned, that's something that I think you tend to see here and there up and down the country, but we don't tend to see something specific for young people, particularly for the younger age group, really, in terms of them understanding their ADHD, which comes to the next point that we'll discuss about when you disclose your ADHD to your, I'm talking to your person about ADHD, but still talking about sort of mental health and things. I think, we discussed about, the pressures that NHS is under, people having to turn to private sector to seek support for their young people, for those that can afford it. What would you want to see, like, if you had that magic wand to maybe help these young people that are struggling? Like, if you had the opportunity to maybe change or influence change in how services are set up going forward, what would you want to see?
I think right now what I want to see is quicker access to assessments and diagnosis, because I do feel like that would have a positive impact in a number of ways, and it would impact positively on mental health broadly as well as everything else, because actually if you've got your needs identified quicker through an assessment, then that can feed back into school, which can mean your school experience can be more positive. It can feed into home, which can mean that parents can support in the right places with the right strategies, but also fundamentally that young person hopefully will be supported to see themselves differently, and that would impact positively on their mental health. So I do feel like the delays to assessment cause lots of additional difficulties actually right across the system. So by managing to bring that right down and reduce that would have a real positive effect. But at the same time, some, I suppose, better integration between mental health services and diagnostic services, because often they are separated into separate teams, separate staff, but actually having staff that are working across and that children can kind of flow across with their assessment, but also with their mental health support, possibly their therapy, whether that's family therapy or CBT or art therapy, whatever it may well be, but integrating it all well together so that it's a bit more of a kind of one-stop shop, rather than everything being, well, you have to go here for this bit and here for that bit, and families, really get fed up with telling their story on repeat, and how can we help reduce that, really?
Yeah. The other thing I was going to discuss, obviously, we wanted to talk about talking to your child about their diagnosis of ADHD. So this is after they've just been diagnosed. This is something that I usually get asked by parents and carers quite a lot, in terms of when, similar to those that have their children being diagnosed with autism, when do you disclose? It depends obviously with the developmental age for this child as well, or young person. When do you disclose? When do you sit down and talk to them about it? What was and what do you need to focus and talk about? Do you do all at once? Do you kind of drip feed them? Do you need to use some resources alongside to kind of supplement what you're saying and videos and stuff? So from your take, what would you say in terms of like talking to your child about their diagnosis? What would be the best sort of advice?
I'd say definitely it needs to be individualized. So every child is different and parents know their children best. So I'm always led by parents. But I think once you get up to secondary age, it is really important that these conversations happen sooner rather than later. And even the later years of primary school, because children know that there's something a bit different about them, or they understand that they're struggling, they compare themselves to their peers. And so helping them understand why that is really important. So I know that often parents feel a bit anxious about, having these conversations, but actually in the long run, it is for the best to have these conversations to help the child make sense of what's going on around them and why some things are more difficult for them than perhaps their brother or sister or someone else at school. So I would say, do try and move to that conversation as soon as you can, but absolutely using resources and doing it in a way that fits for that child is important. So you don't have to have a big long time sitting down together, looking over it all, going through it. Actually, having these conversations whilst you're out and about on a walk, whilst you're bouncing on a trampoline, playing football, it's all, that's fine. It's where's best. Where will that child be most relaxed and in a position to listen and have a bit of a conversation with you? But again, you don't have to do it all in a big go. Break it down over time and really begin to help them understand that the difficulties that they're having are related to their ADHD and what that means. What I often suggest is that it can be worth doing a little bit of a project together on ADHD over time. So thinking about, well, what does it stand for? What does ADHD mean? What does it mean for you? But also, who's in the public eye that has ADHD that perhaps your child recognizes or looks up to? So doing a bit of research together on the internet, looking at YouTubers as well as some of the people in the public eye are often recognized by us as adults and parents, but they're not that recognizable to some of the children that we work with. So I'm always mindful of trying to think and work with them to think about people that mean something to them. And that is an important piece of work, but also looking at websites together. So the ADHD Foundation in Liverpool, their website is brilliant. They've got so much on there for families and for children directly as well. So I always recommend that families have a look at that so that they can get more child-friendly information, and books, audiobooks, podcasts. It's important that the medium of the resources fits for the child and for the parent, so that there are options out there. The YouTuber Jessica McCarbe on how to ADHD, I recommend her to parents, adults, children, because I just think she's done it very well, very nicely, easy to understand. Short clips about ADHD that you can then build on block by block. You don't have to sit down and do all in one go. All really helpful to begin to tackle this kind of understanding of, okay, so this is why I need a little bit more help to get my answer down on paper at school, or how come I'm always leaving my mobile phone at home every day and when I've forgotten stuff, or leaving my water bottle at school all the time, all of those kinds of things, just trying to make sense of it for them.
Yeah, I think we are in a generation, particularly for the older teenagers, certainly, where they have social media, and what you find now, most of them are to some extent informed about what is ADHD, and the good thing is there are lots of clips and things you can access online. You mentioned about Jessica on YouTube. There's so many clips I've seen on YouTube, on Instagram, for example, that talk about ADHD and normalizes it in a way that it's easily received by young people, for example, which compared to the early days when we went into this, we didn't have any of that. It was more like us professionals having to use information that we provided to our service users. So now I think I agree. I think it's tapping into the resources and information available through what we provide, social media, and also trying to focus on the positives as well. Because what we find, particularly at that age, when we do assessments, certainly can come across as being quite negative, focusing on the difficulties rather than just the strength. And I'm being conscious of that as well when I do my assessment, to try and, to some extent, highlight the positives that the young person, their strengths, for them to see that it's not just all kind of negative. So certainly that's something that parents can sort of tap into and just include that, okay, you're quite good at sports and this is what you're quite good at, but at the same time there are areas that you are struggling in, and also just giving the glimmer of hope that there is support out there. The fact that it's been acknowledged and been highlighted and there's a name for it, it just means that it allows you opportunities to be able to receive support going forward.
Absolutely, definitely. And I think, the sports side of things can be really positive, and so many young people, do their hyperactivity gets channeled into their sport, and there are so many elite sportsmen and women that have ADHD and openly talk about that. I think that is really helpful for young people to see that their ADHD doesn't have to hold them back. It doesn't have to limit their opportunities. And there are, you can become a Olympic gymnast or an Olympic swimmer because other people have done it too.
What's made you what drew you into coming into this kind of field in the first place? I don't think I've ever asked you that question before. What was it that attracted you? Yeah.
So when I was studying to be a clinical psychologist, I did my research project at that point on ADHD, and found it really interesting. And I mean, that was 25 years ago now. So, but it was really helpful to kind of understand a bit more about these children and their families, and the work at Croydon was. Some of my time was a specialist to ADHD and autism, and I just found it very interesting. I think there's something there about how it connects and disconnects whole families. So it's not just about an individual child, even though the diagnosis might be about to be an individual, but ADHD can have such an impact across a whole family system. So that I really enjoy that piece of the work, that you're thinking about everybody, you're thinking about the parents. And over time, I think my interest has much more turned to girls and women, and that's been with ADHD. That's been, something that I've really enjoyed understanding more and more about and feel really passionate about. But as we were talking about right at the beginning, really thinking about not just even the family, but that whole system, and in fact the public, in terms of everybody's understanding about ADHD in all its different presentations and types, so that we can help generally as a society, whether you're an education professional, a health professional, a parent, or just a member of the public, that so that there are employers as well. I don't particularly do work in this area, but I look at other people's work and think it's so important that big organizations and small organizations make reasonable adjustments for people in the workplace that have neurodiversity. And it feels like a really big movement. And I have to say, over the last few years, it really feels like ADHD has finally got its time. For many, many years, it was always all about autism, and there was much less time and thought given to ADHD. But actually, lots of people have been working very hard for a very long time, and it feels like we are getting there, and that people are talking about it more. The stigma has reduced, thanks in part to social media, and that we are moving to a much better place around ADHD and people's understanding and willingness to talk about their own ADHD.
If you could just maybe tell us a little bit more about what you mentioned about females and ADHD. Is that a piece of work, some research you're doing around that area, or what's the situation?
I'm not doing any research, but so I published a book a few years ago, Understanding ADHD in Girls and Women, and that was one of the first books in the UK to look at that, and really just I've carried on with that interest in terms of assessment work, meeting individuals, but also providing training to other professionals working in the field to make sure people are aware that ADHD in girls and women can look a bit different. It's important to be thinking about it, and particularly when someone comes in with a mental health presentation, because things have often been missed. And what I've seen is this huge explosion of women, adult women particularly, coming forward and talking about their childhood experiences and in adulthood, and coming to a new understanding that they also have ADHD. And sometimes that's on the back of their child having an assessment, but sometimes not. Sometimes it's due to lots of the awareness raising that's been done. I've done interviews for Radio 4 and written in magazines as well, kind of getting it out into the bigger sphere. Really, it's just so important, because as we said right back at the beginning, often it leads to significant mental health concerns.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there's more talk around that, and certainly from some conferences I've been to, they've actually included presentations around females and ADHD, understanding it from a second diagnostic point of view. The whole issue around masking, certainly that's something we still come across even now, where some people are very rigid with questionnaires and rating scales, and how someone who might appear as if they are coping from a teacher's point of view, in this example, might be literally struggling, but that's not really appearing or showing. And then the clinical team or wherever services is trying to assess them, they're looking at it from, nope, the rating scales are not indicating that there's any issues. And it's those cases that I tend to struggle, or I find that they slip through the net. I'm sure you've come across them as well, where understanding of how ADHD presents in females, and certainly in a few population of males as well, that might sort of mask their traits, and understanding how that can appear. So I think it's down to us as clinical staff to raise our awareness and know how to pick these cohort of clients up, really. So yeah, good on you. I need to. I didn't know that you had a book around that. So
there you go. You see, it's another one on the list.
Another one on the list. Yeah.
Your shopping basket is getting heavier.
No, I think I need one that's you can sign for me. Just do
Oh yeah, of course.
That would be good. That would be amazing. So and what's for the future then? Just for you, like what are you working on now, and what are you kind of planning to do in the next sort of few years?
It's a good question. So definitely, we are in Achieving for Children. We've been working on testing out QB, which has been really exciting. We've had a year. We're about 6 months into a year of testing QB, which is a computerized task, which can help with an ADHD assessment. So that's been a really good development that we're taking on. In terms of other work, I'm certainly continuing to do lots of training for other professionals on ADHD. So I do lots of training for other psychologists, people who work in child mental health services on ADHD and assessing for ADHD, and particularly picking up the girls and women piece around that. So yeah, it's busy.
Oh, do you know, I want to go into kind of, writing a book, and I think for me it's just, I've got the ideas, it's just to sit down and put it all in writing. So that's fingers crossed.
Well, my publisher is always looking for new authors, and I mean, what I would say is that there's not a lot of money in it necessarily, but it is good for your profile and obviously all that you do. So if you've got ideas, and particularly they're always looking for publications on ADHD, then I'm happy to give you their contact details.
That would be great. That will be. I think that will give me a nudge.
Yeah, make you do it.
No, yeah. I went to the ADHD conference last year in the States. So many authors there. Tons. They will all do their signings and all of the books that inspired me. I came back and I was like, I'm going to write a book. Come in September now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You can do it. Yeah. Definitely, you can do it. I always say, there's a book in everyone.
You've spurred me on, Joe. You've definitely spurred me on. Feel free anytime there's any specific topic
Sounds
you want
good.
to come back to talk to us about, or if you have any publications or any research, anything that you want to share with the world, then let us know.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Definitely. And I'm going to send you over your the editor's name at the book company, because I reckon we'll get a book out of you.
I'm glad that you've got that faith in me.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'm going to set myself a challenge now. Yeah, that's you've definitely spurred me on. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, feel free, drop them in,
Cool.
And catch up soon, Joe.
Yeah, definitely catch up soon. Stay in touch.
And you, no problems. Good to see you.
And you, take care.
See you then. Bye.
Bye.
Right.